He's done a lot of great things, been a lot of places, know a lot of people, but I want y'all to give a hand to a fellow grandfather of mine, Ron Sider.
I'm going to be with 4 of those wonderful 6 granddaughters this weekend. It's truly an incredible honor for me to share this platform this morning with Dr. Cotton. One of the things that wasn't said in detail about her is that she organized the Children's March that we read about and talked about as we went through the park this morning. So among many, many, many things that you've done, thank you so much for that incredibly courageous activity. I'm grateful for her emphasis on the importance of all the other people in addition to Dr. King in the civil rights movement. Her emphasis that it's not just about one great leader who fell from the sky. Thank you so much for reminding us that all of us can make a difference, even start an important action. And I'm also grateful for her vigor and her enthusiasm. I'm, I think, a little younger than she is, although not a great deal. And so it's wonderful to see somebody at her age so full of enthusiasm and life and energy. It's an encouragement, I think, for all of us who are retired or approaching retirement to remember that we can continue working for the beloved community until the good Lord calls us home. Now, I'm a very unlikely candidate to speak at this important occasion honoring Dr. King's historic letter from the Birmingham jail. I came to this country 51 years ago from Canada on a student visa to do graduate study. My ancestors were certainly not free of racism, but they were not part of this country's wrenching, several hundred-year history of slavery and segregation. I simply do not have the personal connections that many of you do through a long line of ancestors personally involved as oppressor or oppressed in the centuries of living out America's original sin. I'm a recent immigrant. Well, relatively recent. But perhaps that very fact makes me one appropriate voice today. For I represent the many millions of white immigrants who came to these shores over several hundred years and then quickly began to benefit from the numerous advantages, spoken and unspoken, explicit and implicit, that white folks enjoy in a nation where African Americans continue to experience pervasive disadvantage and discrimination. Almost instantly, as a white immigrant, I became a part of that unfair system. When I began my doctoral studies at Yale in 1962, there were not very many African Americans at Yale. In fact, I might never have been admitted in 1962. If in 1962 the previous centuries of discrimination had already been eliminated and corrected, and most African Americans had had educational opportunities equal to what this farm boy from Canada had enjoyed. During our last 2 years in New Haven, my wife and I rented an apartment from an African American couple, Mr. and Mrs. Royster. Mr. Royster was a janitor at Yale, but his salary, cleaning buildings for young people on their way to joining the American elite, did not pay enough for him and his wife to own their own house and enjoy even a modest middle-class lifestyle. So Mr. Royster had a second full-time job, working 16 hours a day, 5 days a week, in order to secure an income that the parents of Yale students whose rooms he cleaned would have considered modest at best. Mr. Royster symbolized for me the racial and economic injustice of this land. But the Roysters helped my wife and me understand American prejudice and racism in many ways. Their young, understandably angry 20-something son was willing to talk to a naive white guy who was willing to listen. And we actually sat with the Roysters that night that Dr. King was martyred and tasted some of their pain. What we learned from the Roysters helped set my wife and me on a journey to understand and help overcome the racism that we slowly began to fathom. Today, I want to thank the Roysters and our black neighbors in North Philadelphia and the Germantown section of Philadelphia, where we lived for more than 40 years, for all that they have taught us. I stand here today then, as I said, as one of the millions of white immigrants to this land who have benefited from the nation's white racism. And I am determined not only to confess our sinful complicity in that racism, but also determined to continue the struggle to build the beloved community. But I am not just a white immigrant. I am also a white evangelical. And we all know, accurately, that white evangelicals have often played a particularly prominent sinful role in America's long racist history. Yes, I know, and I'm very proud of the fact that white evangelicals were among the prominent abolitionists in the 19th century. But other white evangelicals, more white evangelicals, were among the harsh practitioners and intellectual defenders of slavery. When Dr. King led his courageous, nonviolent campaign against segregation, white evangelicals, with only a very few exceptions, were at best silent and often clearly hostile. When the courts outlawed segregation in the schools, many white evangelicals set up racist private academies. When politicians used subtle racist appeals, white evangelicals seldom objected and often joined the campaigns. Thank God that in the last decade or two, more and more white evangelicals have confessed this racist past and have truly sought to change. Openly racist attitudes are no longer acceptable in white evangelical circles. But to this day, white evangelicals tend to understand racism in only personal terms, and they fail to understand the structural aspects of racism. We still have much to learn from Dr. King's insistence that we must deal not just with the symptoms, but also with the causes, especially the structural causes. The long history of many white evangelicals, the long racist history of many white evangelicals, makes it perfectly clear why African American Christians proudly call themselves Bible-believing, but hardly ever describe themselves as evangelicals. Interestingly, in our frequently similar piety, songs, revivals, emphasis on personal conversion, concern to be biblical, and even basic theology, white evangelicals and black Christians are probably closer than any other two groups of American Christians. But the two groups have almost no interaction, and they certainly vote dramatically differently. Until white evangelicals not only repent of their racist past, but begin to act vigorously to live in faithful, non-racist ways, one cannot expect anything much to change. And my hope and prayer is that white evangelical participation in this response to Dr. King's historic letter will be one substantial step in repenting of our racist past, in overcoming a sinful divide in the body of Christ, and in leading to a new understanding and cooperation. Christian Churches Together's letter in response to Dr. King has the right words. We correctly highlight key areas where we solemnly resolve to act. We rightly say that we must end the gross injustice where abysmally inadequate urban, largely minority schools exist alongside excellent, largely white suburban schools. We rightly insist that we must change a judicial system that imprisons and devastates a disproportionate number of young African American men. And we wisely resolve to work together to learn how to expand the use of Dr. King's daring, creative use of nonviolent methods. But I must confess that as I came to Birmingham, I wondered whether our words would really make any difference. Words alone are totally inadequate. Our words will remain cheap and empty unless we allow God to move us to new, more vigorous action. I pray that we will resolve to allow the risen Lord Jesus, whose glorious resurrection we have recently or will soon celebrate, to blow through our lives and our actions, so transforming us that 20 years from now, our children will say, "Thank God that Christian Churches Together's response to Dr. King's letter in 2013 truly energized a new movement of justice and reconciliation and nonviolent peacemaking." Please God, may it be so.
Amen.